Welcome back. This is Psychology Applied to Work, Lecture 8, Job Performance. All right, let's recap. Last lecture, Lecture 7, Job Analysis. That was Chapter 3. Today's lecture is also Chapter 3. We talked about the information used to do a job analysis, and we talked about the what of jobs, and we talked about the how of jobs, and then we talked about what is the utility, what is the use, what is the application of a job analysis. And then we went into a little bit more detail about gathering information to do a job analysis, and we went into a little bit more detail of the what and the how with a work-focused and a worker-focused job analysis. Today is the second half of Chapter 3, and Chapter 3 is a very short lecture. I think it's only like 12 pages or something. Other chapters have been 25 pages, even I think, or 24 pages, 30 pages. So this is a nice bite-sized chapter. So we will have hopefully a nice bite-sized second lecture to go with it. So this should be a short lecture. All right, so when we're talking about job performance, we are going to be talking about task performance, and we're going to be talking about contextual performance and the differences between those. And we're going to be talking about counterproductive work behavior, and we're going to end it with job crafting. All right, task and context, the two different dimensions when you're looking at job performance. And I should add that this is job performance. This is not performance management. Performance management will be coming up in future lectures. So performance management is, how do you actually, assess and improve performance? The job performance lecture today is really about, how do you categorize performance? How do you define it? So it's really the dimensioning of elements of performance, really, that you're mapping to your job analysis. And then once you get into actually how do you work with people to try to get their performance to get better, how do you go through the process of assessing someone's performance and delivering that. There are a whole bunch of extra things that come to bear when you start judging people. So that is a very important topic, performance management, and it will inevitably be a part of your life, whether you're on the receiving or the giving and receiving end, because if you're in leadership, you will both do performance management on your direct reports, and your manager will also do a performance management on you. But this is just the dimensions. This is just the categories of job performance, and they're actually quite straightforward. Okay, let's talk about task first. This is what's required of the job. This is if you remember the duties, tasks, activities, elements. The tasks are the sort of highest level grouping of what it is your job is for your job duties. And the task is something that your organization needs you to do. If the company you work for is paying you to do these tasks. So an easy way of looking at it is just what's for sure required of the job. And that might be your ability to technically do the job. That might involve technical skill, or it could also be just, are you available to physically do the job. And then a task performance categorizing is objective. You need a way to measure it, to assess it. Did you perform the task, and to what degree did you perform it, and then how well did you perform it? And the how well did you perform it is that's where things start to get a little bit squirrelier, a little bit grayer, to be able to stay objective. But compared to the contextual performance elements that we'll talk about next, it's by far the easier to make objective. And then obviously these are the elements that are mapped to the job requirements that you established in the job analysis. So what is contextual performance? And these terms, task performance and contextual performance, these are IO psychology terms. You might run into these at certain levels with HR or HR consulting, but these aren't necessarily the terms. In fact, a lot of the terms that we'll be talking about today, like organizational citizenship and counterproductive work behavior, those usually come in with different names, at least in corporate America. But the concept is the same, and these are good terms. So contextual performance is usually something that isn't required. It's not explicitly defined in your job description as something you must do. Sometimes it kind of is in general language, but it doesn't tie to a specific task. It doesn't have defined activities or elements around it. But it's certainly vitally important, and you can get promoted, recognized, reprimanded, or fired for failure to do your task performance. But you can also get promoted, recognized, reprimanded, or fired for your contextual performance. In fact, in my experience of the people that in my career I have had to fire or have had to work with a supervisor that worked underneath me to essentially fire somebody, it's quite often been contextual. It's quite often been how well they work with others, or sort of complicated matters, and it hasn't always been. In fact, I think it's a minority of times in my experience when it was actually you aren't performing the task. So these things are as important. Each one, the contextual versus task, is at least of equal importance. It really depends on circumstances, but each one's critical. So when you look at contextual performance, one of the terms is OCBs or organizational citizenship behaviors, and there's sort of different dimensions of this. One example of an organizational citizenship behavior might be something as simple as you wear the company merch. You work for a big company and they have a known brand, and you have a shirt that has that company logo on it, or a hat, or you put a sticker on your laptop that's sort of embracing the company brand, or maybe a vision statement or logo of the company. It might be simply not resonating with people complaining, or providing a counter narrative when you're hearing people cut down the company or complain. These are all sort of good citizenship stuff. These are ways that you're helping the organization that aren't on your job description. A lot of big companies have what are called employee resource groups, which are typically internal voluntary organizations that provide things like cookouts and recognition events and that sort of thing. So it's sort of you can think of like the internal pep rally or the cheerleaders, but they literally try to do things within the organization that improves people's well-being, makes them feel better about their job. Other OCBs can be literally just going to events or actively participating in things that are optional. Showing your enthusiasm for the organization. It can be referring candidates, people that that you think would work really well within the organization, actively recruiting them and saying good things about your organization, and working with your human resources to try to get them hired and onboarded. It can be volunteering. There's a lot of volunteering opportunities in organizations where, like the company or the nonprofit or the school or whatever it is that you work, will sponsor volunteer events and giving of your time, where you're representing the organization is a big deal. And that's another great example. Also, outreach. So there might be things you do that aren't explicitly, formally part of the organization, but are generally so positive that the fact that people know who you are and where you work, some of that beneficial spotlight, also shines on the company. If people who volunteer in elementary schools for, I suppose in technical areas like robotics leagues, or junior business leaders type stuff, where it might not be in the official capacity of your organization, but where your organization would certainly welcome any connections made. And that's not always true. A lot of times you might be part of an organization outside some sort of private affiliation that might, it might be partisan or otherwise not something that everybody in your employer's organization or certainly not all of the customers of that organization really want to be a part of. So sometimes your organization will be very careful to explain to you that, whatever you do outside of work, that's fine. But don't associate the company with what you do. Don't go on Facebook and talk as though you represent the company, because you're not, an official public relations person. So, please be careful about that. So that's certainly true. But there are some things, some volunteer things where, companies and organizations will welcome the association. And then mentoring, coaching people, whispering, if you're the person that really has the trust of somebody that has gotten upset about something or at somebody, and you can kind of talk that person off a ledge. These are all sort of intangible things that might not be on your job description, but can be very beneficial to the company. So these organizational citizenship behaviors are ways in which you help your organization that's outside your explicit job description. Another thing that is often sort of referenced in a job description, and certainly an element that gets looked for when hiring a little bit more formally than some of the examples I was just giving on OCBs, is teaming. Is how well do you perform in a team? Are you a go-it-alone loner type, or are you all in for the team? I've seen examples where people have difficulty allowing their individual assigned work to be seen as anything other than perfect, even if allowing a little imperfection in your work product meant the team you're part of had a better outcome. In other words, there are people that have to adjust to realize that they're being assessed, that they're being graded, if you want to use a school metaphor, on how successful the team is, and being willing to have your particular things that you're trying to get done maybe not be an A+, maybe be a B, in order to keep the larger team and the overall project from getting a D or failing. That's an adjustment people have to make. That how well do they associate their own success with the team's success, and how much might they be focusing on themselves and making sure that people at least see them. Sure, the project crashed and burned, but I did my part and I did it really well. There may be some cultures where company cultures where that would be recognized, but most company cultures would view that as you took a expedient route, you took an individual centered route, and not a company or an organization centered route. So teaming is really important. I mean, do you have a give and take with a group? Are you affiliative with the group? Do you model the right behavior when you're in a team setting? So Is it all about you? Do you make sure that you always get the credit for anything you touched? Or worse, do you try to take the credit that a team performed and make sure that you get most of the limelight? And that can be a very disengaging for a team, especially if a leader is doing that. If the leader of a project or the manager of a team is seen to be, performatively, theatrically claiming individual credit so that they can be the superachiever and the hero, and not allowing the people that did the work too, or maybe in some cases did most of the work, to have their due, to have their recognition. So, a good leader in a team-oriented culture, steps back and lets the people that really did the work, take the credit. And people are smart, and they see when a leader is doing that, and that actually ends up being very good for the career of the leader often. So it's not about you. Don't worry about the credit kind of thing. That's a good teaming dynamic, and that's an example of good contextual performance, at least in most cultures. And then talking about cultures is how well do you actually align with the organization's culture? What is the central focus? What's the loci, the focal areas? What are the things that your culture of your employer really cares about? Are they driven by profit, or are they hyper focused on the customers being satisfied? Are they super focused on quality and being excellent and having an excellent reputation for their product, or their services? Are they focused on efficiency? Do they tend to be shorter or long-term focused? Are they, from a values framework, are they all about the stockholders, or are they a little more expansive about the stakeholders? So it's a stockholder versus stakeholder capitalism is a debate we're having in our society right now. And then are they old school, or are they like a modern tech culture? And this has a lot to do with how formal things are, literally like what you wear and what your work schedule is, and whether you talk back to your superiors, kind of thing. I mean, there's a lot of cultural elements that alignment or fit matters. And if you're just chafing underneath the culture, people feel that. It certainly affects your engagement, and then people don't always respond to that well, because you're not modeling behavior that's in line with the culture. So your behavior is actually pushing other norms, and not the current cultural norms. And so you're actually in some ways a little subversive element, a little countercultural entity within the culture. So doesn't mean that it's right or wrong. It's just misaligned. And the more aligned you are with the culture, basically the more effective of you are. So it's better in some regards to have alignment, to have. So if you had to choose between 100 people that were, say, a C grade on their skill of what it is you're trying to do, like build a bridge, versus 100 people that were all A pluses, but those 100 people that were C level people, they really worked together. They had give and take. They were all about the team's success, whereas all of the A plus people, if they were all about themselves and stubborn and fixed on their way is the right way, which one would actually build a better bridge? In many cases, a group of average performers, highly aligned, a good team spirit, a lot of alignment on the cultural level, usually they do better than a bunch of hero geniuses trying to go their own way. Extra effort is also a big deal. What's your work-life balance? When 5 o'clock rolls around, are you out of there, man, kind of thing? Do you say, hey, that's not my job? Do you complain when extra work comes in? When you have to work hard, work long, and you're going to do a sprint, how long can you sprint? This is a big deal, and I'm not saying one's better than another, because work-life balance is all about choices, and in some cases you have things in your life that just matter more. You have a family member in your home that's very ill, or you have small children, or you're working on skills outside of work. You have competing priorities, but that will likely affect your how fast you accelerate in your job. Where people who work harder, people who go the extra mile, people who do the thing that wasn't asked of them, they tend to move faster. All other things being equal, and life is about trade-offs, and that's not necessarily the path you should take. It really depends on your circumstances. All right, let's talk about counterproductive work behavior. Outside of biopsychology, I'm not. I haven't run into the term CWB, but it's definitely a term that everybody understands, and the two different dimensions of it. You definitely understand it. You will see this in yourself at times, because you're human. You might see it a lot in yourself if you find yourself in a position, in a role that just isn't you, or you find that the work environment that you're in has become dysfunctional or toxic. You might discover that you're engaging in counterproductive work behaviors, and it's important to at least understand them, and make your own decisions about what kind of member of the team you want to be. So, counterproductive work behaviors. First of all, anytime you have groups, anytime you have a group, you're going to have norms and norm enforcement. That is, we cannot help ourselves. We need to understand, what is this group and what are our rules, and once we sort of understand that, both implicitly and explicitly, we of course then become pretty strong about norm enforcement. And as I said in previous lecture, that we can be as a species quite vicious about enforcing norms. And some interesting things we'll often tolerate. We're more tolerant typically of a norm violation from somebody that we know is an outgroup member, and we tend to be much stronger in our response and feel more threatened when an in-group member of our own group violates a norm, because it's sort of challenging the existing binding narrative, the story that's holding us all together. And when someone from the outside, so to speak, a new hire that doesn't quite understand how these things work, or somebody from another company who might be a supplier or a customer, and they don't quite understand what your traditions are. Maybe you're at a company where it's just the way it is. Everybody shows up 5 minutes early to every meeting, and everybody is quiet during the presentation, which is somehow those norms got established, and that's how it is. And all of a sudden, you get the new person, and they're 5 minutes late instead of 5 minutes early. That may or may not be tolerated well, but it's typically tolerated a little bit more if that's the new guy, or if it's a visitor, that sort of thing. So humans are weird, and so the norms can be formal, they can be easily identifiable, but they can also be implicit and things you just sort of know but you can't explain. So there's two ways of looking at counterproductive work behavior, at least according to the chapter, and it makes sense, feels complete. And that's really to what extent is your counterproductive work behavior directed at other individuals, and to what extent is it directed sort of generically at the organization. So are you doing something that is counterproductive, but it relates to how you feel about another person? People don't always get along. That's for sure. And it's weird. You can have two friends and you like both of them, but those two friends don't like each other. And we all kind of understand this. As an engineer, it's weird to me that if you assess somebody and you feel affiliative towards them, and you look at them and go, these are these good qualities, and I trust them, and then you have another friend you feel the same way, but yet the two of them don't trust each other, and maybe they hate each other. It's weird, but it's certainly real. The manifestation of individual to individual issues that result in counterproductive work behaviors are highly variable. So they show up everywhere. No doubt you can rattle off lots of circumstances where people have behaved in a way that just was annoying, ran counter to whatever your team was trying to do, whether it was a study group, a work group, a sporting group, or what have you. You get somebody or a couple people, and they're getting into it about something, and all of a sudden they're not cooperating. They're distracted, or they're complaining, or they're trying to get you into their alliance against another person. It's everywhere, and the workplace is still an environment, and those are still biped mammals. Walking around, even we wear weird clothes, and we seem very artificial, but we are absolutely definitely still analogous to a bunch of baboons, a bunch of chimps, and we have personalities and personality clashes. And in some cases it's just weird personality chemistries, but some cases it can be based on something hierarchical, a dominance hierarchy sort of emerging that just doesn't belong, or bothers somebody. You also can have, you for sure can have genuine malice. You can have people who they're just resentful, and they're spiteful, and they're just mean. That's for sure. Most often it is just based upon there being fundamental misunderstandings, misattributions. Where you think somebody's out to get you. That's actually a thing I've dealt with a lot over the years, is talking somebody off a ledge because they're sure that somebody is out there to make them look bad, and they're concerned for their job and their performance, and they think somebody is out there saying bad things against them, and even logical and supposedly logical engineers fall into that. And if you start to get that notion of he's out to get me, or this company's out to get me, if you're not careful, just that belief can have sort of a self-fulfilling element to it, where you start to act antagonistically because you think people are acting antagonistically to you, and you can end up with a kind of chip on your shoulder and a quick reflex about things. And you can go negative because you think somebody's going negative with you, and that person might not have a clue that they said the wrong thing to you. There's a lot of this in any organization. So, what is the overall trust level between people? And with it, does the organization that you're in, foster trust, or does it foster a lot of competition? Some organizations are super competitive, and it fosters kind of a backstabbing environment where you don't really trust your coworkers, because it's really cutthroat, and maybe they fire the bottom 10% every year and promote the top people, and so it's actually ends up being a lot on the line. That can drive some really unfun kind of behavior. Or to what extent do you mind your own business? Or do you complain about everybody? Or do you watch how much time anybody is working? And if somebody isn't working as hard as you, do you make it your mission to make sure everybody knows that? Those don't generally help you, and they tend to make the workplace not that much fun. So, if you're throwing stones, to what extent do you yourself live in a glass house? And then there's the other side, which is counterproductive work behavior that's aimed at the organization. Do you trust your organization? Do you trust your leaders? If you don't, if you really think that, oh, these, senior management doesn't know anything, or they're out to get us, they don't care about us at all, they just care about their stock options, and they're going to do layoffs again soon. I mean, maybe that's true, or maybe it's ambiguous, and that's one of the possible ways you can interpret a situation. But if you interpreted that situation, that you're part of an organization that you don't feel has you in your best interest, that you don't feel trust you, well, then your whole notion of in-group is sort of blurring. And now to some extent, management or leadership or the CEO, or the guy down the hall is not in your in-group anymore, and is in your out-group, and you can justify a lot of behavior if you feel it's towards an out-group that might be some level of threat to you. So do you loaf? do you waste the organization's time or money? Under what circumstances is that okay to you? And if you lose trust, if you don't feel like who you work for is really genuinely part of your in-group, it's pretty easy to construe why I'm not stealing the company's time. I mean, they don't appreciate us at all, and we're not being paid what we're worth. And I mean, all sorts of stories can come out of your mouth to rationalize your expedient and arguably unethical behavior. And to some extent, everybody is guilty of this to in some form or another, often small little trivial things. But some cases quite significant things, And then if you're loafing, if you're not pulling your weight, if you're quiet quitting, as sometimes they say, how is that affecting other people? Do you waste other people's time? You sit and spend 3 hours in an afternoon together with coworkers just bitching about the current situation. Well, okay, well, if you're all being paid, you're burning the organization's money doing that. And I'm not saying there aren't circumstances where one needs to do that just to vent, but don't kid yourself that that's not counterproductive work behavior. So, I mean, in what way does your actions, either indirect or direct, because sometimes your action can be willful failure, willfully not participating in something, and to what extent does that actually undermine the organization? So, things to think about. These things, these counterproductive work behaviors, they're not always conscious, they're not always things that you recognize, or some cases you, like I said, just rationalize them away. So they're not always easy to spot. Sometimes they definitely are, but sometimes they're subtle. Okay, so this is our last slide, other than our recap slide. So I told you this was a short lecture. This is about of trying to match up a performance, with the job. So this is sort of how do you tailor the individual to the job, and is that easy? In some cases it's not, but it also, at least to some extent, is inevitable. So I mean, job descriptions, job analysis, it's imperfect. It's incomplete. No job description really captures everything. And we talked about even the task stuff. I mean, you say, oh, these are the tasks and the duties or whatever. Often there's more, or the priorities aren't quite right. And certainly over time, as an organization evolves, as markets shift, as people gain experience and end up taking less time to do things, as people come and go and you end up taking on more responsibilities, you end up with sort of a less and less complete, less and less accurate job description, until you do a formal redesign and try to sort of reset it. Job crafting or an evolution of what your role is to suit the both evolving needs of the organization and your changing capabilities, your changing affinities. You're used to really like doing something, now you don't, and so you kind of work your way to try to do more of the thing you like and less of the thing you don't like, if you can get away with it. So how do you tailor the job to the individual, and both formally and informally? Well, the formal way, yeah, of course, is to define your KSAOs, your knowledge, your skills, your abilities, and then the other characteristics. You try to align that with the job, and if you can align that, you're going to get better engagement. You're going to get better productivity. It's important to recognize that people don't always know what they're good at, until they do it, and they don't always know what they like, and what they think they might like, because they see a job or hear about a job and they go, oh, that'd be fun, but oftentimes the description doesn't capture actually the full rich detail of what it is that you do. Or something that looks like fun, that sounds like that would be really important, and then after you've been doing it for 3 months, you're like, this is the most tedious thing I've ever done in my life. I hate my life. I'm going back to where I was before. So this should make sense to people, that you just can't quite know till you're in there. So, and it isn't necessarily about finding the perfect fit. You should give it some time and try to adapt and that sort of thing. But sometimes you just know that this job, this isn't my fastball, so to speak. And then sometimes people just get tired of something. The thing that was challenging for a long time, you've gotten better and better, and maybe people have implemented some productivity tools that it's now easier as well, and it's just not the same. It doesn't have the same meaning. Or the purpose, what you do your work for, and who it went to, and what it was part of. Maybe that's actually diminished, and so you're struggling with the point of it, the meaning of what you're doing. So these things ebb and flow, and they're always changing. And people want challenge. People typically want to grow. To be static, lends itself to boredom. We are to some extent novelty seeking, and some people more than others. Some people don't like any change, and some people want change constantly. But people typically find meaning and purpose in mastery, in getting really good at something that's challenging. And once you're really good at it, and it's no longer challenging, that whole, all right, I'm great at this. But if doing it is easy, that feeling doesn't last. And so what's happening to sort of stretch a person? And a lot of times people in their job will then look for more responsibilities or demonstrate they can do stuff, and so more things will go on their plate. And so over time, jobs do tend to craft, they do tend to evolve to better suit the individual. Not always. There are times when, hey, this is the job we need, and you just got to keep doing it. Certainly, a factory position, but there's plenty of non-factory, sort of cubicle laptop type positions where you're doing some sort of transaction, and it doesn't matter if you don't like it. If you don't do it, the company can't pay its bills, or you're not paying your suppliers' bills or whatever. And another thing with crafting, and I'm talking about the sort of natural evolution of crafting. Obviously, there's a formal crafting, but there's a certain amount of self-selection element to it, where you try to advocate, and there's a certain amount of managing up, which is to what extent are you influencing your supervisor or your manager to control what's on your plate, and maybe have the good things on your plate that you like, and to not get the things you don't like on your plate. And another thing that's interesting on this and the whole lining up the individual to the job is the 80-20 rule definitely applies for people's productivity, which is to say that depending upon the circumstance, and certainly in challenging, ambiguous, problem-solving jobs or creative jobs, you'll find that 20% of the people do 80% of the impactful work. In fact, some cases it's more like 95-5 which is to say that like one person who's like really tuned in to the role is worth 20 people. I mean, there are some circumstances like in the tech world where there are just some people that are just hyper good at their role. You know, finding witnessing a talented individual that's been allowed to develop true mastery in a role and to develop really deep domain knowledge, deep KSAOs, really deep knowledge, deep skills, you know, honed into their abilities and any other characteristics that line up. You know, seeing that, you know, a person just fully engaged in their role, it is a sight to behold. Human excellence, and it's also super rare because you know the organization has needs, and you're part of a role you're getting typically paid for, and what exactly you would be perfect at isn't always what the company or organization needs. But trying to always get a better fit is both more fulfilling to the individual, and it has better outcomes for the organization too. All right, well, that is the lecture. Said this would be shorter, and we're now done with chapter 3, and we'll go through real quick what we just talked about with job performance. So recall we talked about how the two dimensions of it, that the way IO psychology looks at it, is task performance, the required aspects, the what, and the other side is the contextual performance. And to some extent, this is like the what how. That comparison still generally applies. But the contextual performance, we talked about organizational citizenship behavior, modeling good behavior, being a good team member, going the extra mile, all of those things. And then we talked about counterproductive work behavior in a number of examples, and to some extent, at least at a low level, it's inevitable. But that at certain levels it can also be quite toxic, and certainly both bad for the individual. You know, it's no fun being in a position where you hate your job, you hate your life, and you tell everybody. You're no fun to be around, and you're no fun. Typically also if you have a family at home, they typically know you hate your life. So extricating yourself from those circumstances is usually best for everybody, and certainly best for the organization, best for you, and best for those around you. And then we talked about job crafting. How do you best align somebody's affinities, things they like, and somebody's competencies, what they're good at, with what is needed by the organization. All right, and then next lecture will be our third bonus lecture, and this one hopefully will be fun. I don't think we're going to get into any physics, and I don't think we're going too deep in neuroscience, but it'll be a number of bite-sized concepts, and it's around why we work. Obviously we work for the money. In many cases, because we need money, we work for resources, that sort of thing. So getting resources, to some extent, we do these things for this thing called happiness, or at least we try to at least avoid unhappiness. And then there's a community element, an affiliative, pro-social, sense of belonging and identity that comes from that. And then there's a sense of duty sometimes that people feel, that can be fulfilling, and is also heavily influenced by culture, and of course meaning. People, we seek meaning, and we don't always find it in the workplace, but when we do, it makes it all worthwhile. All right, so that is lecture 8. I hope it was nice and digestible, bite size, and we will see you for lecture 9.